Hi everyone, and welcome to the All Things ITSM Global Podcast, coming to you from Service Management 2015 in Sydney. I'm Kirsty McGowan, I'm here with Suresh GP.
Hello everybody.
Ivan McFarlane.
Hello there.
And we're talking with Erin Casteel from Veridity. Hi Erin.
Hello.
Nice to have you on board.
Lovely to be here.
Right. Well, Erin, you are the driving force behind ISO 20000 going forward, and it's interesting to see that's now being driven out of Australia. Good sign. Would you like to tell us about what's been happening in the ISO 20000 world and where you're driving now?
Sure. So just to qualify for our audience, I'm the chair of the group within ISO that develops the ISO IC 20000 series. 20000 became an ISO standard in 2005. It was revised in 2011 and 2012, and now, because ISO management system standards need to be revised every 5 years, we've just kicked off the next revision. Now, a lot of changes have happened in the industry over this period of time, and we're very cognizant of that, and we really want to make sure that 20000 reflects not only how service management needs to work today, but also to future-proof it over the next 10 years. So we've looked at all of the wonderful things that work very well, because it's quite an elegant architecture, as we like to say. But then what other things do we need to do to reflect the direction that service management has gone and is going? What things are potentially no longer as relevant that can be potentially either deleted or minimized? And one of our core principles is around simplifying what we're doing. And the reason is that in terms of the standard, because we want to make sure that it is as applicable to all types of service provider organizations, because a common misconception is that 20000 is limited to only a specific type of services. That isn't actually the case. And particularly now, today, when just about every service we can imagine is IT enabled, we have to be very sure that 20000 is going to be applicable to, in the future, Internet of Things and to multi-supplier services. Exactly. So we're thinking about all of those things. We've spent the past 2 years preparing for this, and now we're beginning the exciting task of making it.
So it must be a pretty good crystal ball then to try and see what's coming in the future, because it's, the industry is changing so rapidly. I mean, looking back 5 years ago, you would never have imagined what we're doing now. So that must be a really difficult and perplexing thing to try and guess what you might have to be dealing with.
It is, but if we stick to this concept of simple and elegant,
it'll fit anything.
Correct. What we want to try to do is have an adaptive, as flexible a framework as possible. And it is a standard, and organizations get certification against it. So for 20000 Part 1, that is a management system standard requirements that organizations need to adhere to. But we don't necessarily need to delve down into the how. We focus on the what. And our focus moving forward is keep it as applicable as we can, so that it can be as widely used and can give the greatest benefit to the greatest number of service providers.
So there's a couple of questions, because I just completed ISO 27001 and 22301. There's a kind of a new structure that I've brought in. Now, one of the questions that I always ask is, why is ISO 20000 still sticking to that? Will it change with the 2015 version in terms of normative, the reference that we have from the other standards that's coming off late?
That is such an excellent question. Thank you very much for asking that, because all management system standards, so that would include ISO 9001, that would include 27001, obviously 20000 as well. We are all required by ISO now to adhere to a new structure. Now that's going to be really helpful for organizations, because where previously we had a lot more leeway about how we could organize our management system standards, what terminology, things like that, now we have a standard structure and even a standard set of requirements for a good part of the general part of the management system. So a management system is like an engine. It's all of those things that you need to work properly, right? And that management system can have different areas of focus, for example, services or information security. But then there are a lot of general things, and those things are around management responsibility, resources, documentation management. There's a whole lot of pieces in there that should actually work in a very consistent way. Now we're being required to do that. So yes, to answer your question, 20,000 will be adhering to that, which will make it possible in far more easy even than it already was for an organization that already has 27,001 or 9,001 or another management system standard to get certification to 20,000 because they already fulfill so many of the requirements, which is wonderful.
It makes sense.
It absolutely does.
Love the idea of a standard for standards.
What a concept.
Yeah.
When we were first building BS 15,000, which way back last century was the progenitor for all this.
Correct.
One of the things they gave the committee was a document of this thick called BS 0, which is the British standard for writing British standards. And we couldn't understand a word of it. So I'm glad they've got a simple standard now from ISO that you can actually understand and take forward.
Well, it is about making it as easy as possible for an organization to have an integrated management system, which is how it should work.
Giving some more consistency to
absolutely. So in terms of new things that we're looking at in terms of adding, and none of this is set in stone. These are just possibilities at the moment. We are looking at things like value management, for example, because what we want to have an understanding of is that full life cycle, that full service life cycle, and control over that, because the whole point of the management system is to deliver value to the business. Yes. So we have to make sure, even if it's very simple requirements, it doesn't have to be onerous. It's just making sure that you are asking those questions up front, and then you're able to show the delivery of value, right?
Yes.
Because that is what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, value is the only thing that matters at the end of the day.
In the end,
isn't it?
absolutely
If you're not delivering value, then you're not doing your job.
That's absolutely right. So those are the kinds of things that we're asking. We're looking at things like service integration and management in terms of trends and the direction that things are going. We're looking at public cloud. Now 20,000 is already applicable to cloud services, but we have to ask ourselves, for public cloud, for example, where currently in the current published standard it talks about must agree with the customer. While we can say, well, if you check a box that says I'm happy with that, that does apply, it isn't necessarily clear enough. So by just changing the wording there, something that's already in 20,000 becomes more understood to
more relevant.
Absolutely.
So when you talk about SIAM, do you think about the supply management process being revamped in the sense of looking at multiple suppliers? Like we had a lead supplier and he has to have control over the subcontractor and stuff like that. Does it get varied with the multi-dimension area?
Yeah, so that another excellent question. It isn't, supplier management already exists, is already a very important part of 20,000, and that needs to stay there. That is not going away. And we also already look at subcontracted suppliers and those relationships. It's already in that that clause. However, what we potentially need to look at in terms of augmentation is around integration of suppliers. And that may not, because again, this has to be applicable to very small organizations. This has to be applicable to organizations that aren't necessarily doing SIAM as well. This is where it gets interesting and exciting, because we have to solve the problem. We have to put the hooks in, but not necessarily make it so specific or so onerous, right? So obviously one of the ideas potentially would be, and we're looking at this, something that fits on the other side of the Lego, which is a service integrator certification separate. And just one last thing I just want to throw in, we're also looking, and we're very excited about this, at customer perspective. We've spent the past couple of years thinking about and talking about customer perspective, because that is absolutely essential too.
It is, and so often it is ignored. I mean, what does your customer think of you? And how do they receive the services.
That's right.
I've spoken quite often about, we might need to be good providers, but you need to be good customers too. So,
it was the old story. I mean, throwing a ball over a wall is fine, but you need to teach somebody to catch.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've learned in terms of judging customer perceptions is my daughter's become a account exec in market research companies. Is just how awful we are at customer surveys and how we misunderstand it. And the number of times I've seen people come back and say, we got better customer survey results this year because we're asking 5 times as many people. You really don't understand how it works.
Well, one other really interesting thing in terms of roles is that there are a lot of different customers that we're talking about.
Exactly.
There's the end customer. There's also the person in procurement.
Yes.
There's also the person who, so that within the organization, there are different levels of customers.
Right.
External to the organization, there are different levels of customers. And we actually need to look at and think about all of those different things because customer is not one thing.
And that's very much the thing I love from my daughter, the story that, you don't need to ask a lot of people, you just have to get them across the whole range. And we don't do that very well.
No, so that
it would be
is
lovely to the standard makes people do it right would be wonderful.
Yes. So
Well, it's been a pleasure chatting to you, Erin, and I know there is an awful lot more we could have covered. So hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again sometime.
That would be
and
wonderful.
Cover some more.
Absolutely great, and
information.
thank you for such great conversation.
Thank
Thank you.